Hi guys, François here from Semfio, and in this video we're going to set up the WLAN Pi as a hotspot, right? So what would you want to do that? I have two use cases for that. The first one would be if you want to use a WLAN Pi as the way to generate a signal for you to do your wall attenuation measurements before Wi-Fi design. So that's the first use case, and it's a very practical and easy solution. You just take the WLAN Pi, a Wi-Fi NIC, a portable battery, and that's all you need to generate the signal. And when you visit a site, you can just use that to do your wall attenuation measurements. And then the second use case that I have would be to generate some Wi-Fi traffic in order to look on the spectrum what Wi-Fi traffic looks like, right? So that's something I do when I teach, and I want to show my students what Wi-Fi looks like. I can just set up the hotspot and then connect using one of my devices to the hotspot, and then leverage the speed test that's already configured on the WLAN Pi to generate some traffic, right? And then you can look at the spectrum and analyze Wi-Fi traffic, OFDM, subcarriers, and so on. So that's the two use cases that I have for this setup, and I struggle a little bit to get everything working. I've been willing to do this video and this blog article for a little while, and I'm happy to have it finally working. So I'm going to show you how I did it. It's it might be we might have some ways to improve it in the future, but this is what I currently have, and it's working for my needs. So let's jump into it. At the prerequisite, I'm starting from scratch. So in terms of the WLAN Pi, if you guys don't really know what it is, I invite you to go to the WLANPi.com website, and you can discover what the WLAN Pi is. It's pretty much a little device based on the NanoPi computer that you would use to do some Wi-Fi work, Wi-Fi analysis. And then some amazing guy in the community developed an image, a Linux image that you can download for free and install on the NanoPi that already has some Wi-Fi tools pre-installed. So as I said, I'm starting from scratch. So I went on the GitHub page where you can download the image of the WLAN Pi for free. I downloaded that image, it's a zip file, and then I copied that image onto a micro SD card on my Mac OS using the application called Etcher. And then I just popped that micro SD card into the WLAN Pi, and then connected that WLAN Pi to a battery pack and then boot it up. Second thing that I did is I connected the Ethernet interface of that WLAN Pi to my laptop so I can actually SSH into it. Okay. So when you start the WLAN Pi, it will get an IP address. In my case, it got the 192.168.2.2 from my laptop. And then I can SSH into it using the default credential. So the default username is WLAN Pi. So I can go ahead and SSH into the WLAN Pi. So SSH WLAN Pi at 192.168.2.2. And then the password, the default password is WLAN Pi as well. So you'll see I'm connected with the WLAN Pi user. The first thing that I like to do when I have a fresh install of the WLAN Pi image is I like to create my own username, make it a little bit more personal, I guess. So I'm going to go ahead and then create my my username here. I'm just going to call it François, make it simple. Right, when you do this, it's going to ask you for a password, obviously, so you can set up your own password. First it's asking me for the WLAN password so I can access that, and then now it's asking me for a new password for that François user, so I can go ahead and then set up my new password. Right, and then it might ask you some more details here. I just go really fast. I don't really need to do all of this, and then here you go, I have my François user. Now I need to give him some more privileges so I can actually do some sudo commands when I transition to the François user. So in order to do this, you can just use the sudo user mod with these options and give access to the sudo group for François, and then here you go. This is done. Now if I want to use the François username, I can just use this su command, minus, and then the username, and it's going to ask me for the password that I just set up, and then now I'm in business. I have my user here. All right, next, second thing that I like to do is, you'll notice that when you have a fresh install of the WLAN Pi, if you try to use the ifconfig command, it will tell you that the command is not available because your path doesn't have the sbin subfolder, and you don't have access to the application right off the bat. So what you can do is you can actually modify the folder that's called the .profile that you have under your profile in order to include that sbin folder into that profile. And so if you do that, you'll be able to use ifconfig, no problem. So in order to modify your if profile, you have to, I use nano for that. So I'll just do sudo nano.profile, and then it asks me for my password, tell me to be careful with the sudo command, and then I can go ahead and at the bottom here, I will to the path, my path, I will add path. I will add the sbin, and also use add the user sbin because some applications are in there, and then I can save that file, and then all you have to do is reload your profile. So you can do source profile, and then now I should be able to do ifconfig and see which interfaces are available to me. All right. As you can see, I have my Ethernet interface, the one I'm currently connected to. I have these IP addresses, and I also have the USB. The WLAN Pi by default creates a network connection over the USB. So I could have used that to SSH into the WLAN Pi as well. And then you also have the WLAN interface. Since I connected the Wi-Fi NIC already, I have my WLAN interface up and available to me here. So right now we're pretty much done for the initial steps. The next step would be to configure the hotspot. Right? And to configure the hotspot, we'll be using a program called hostapd from Linux. And hostapd should already be installed on the WLAN Pi. Okay, and to validate that the package is already installed, you can use the dpkg command -list, and then if you do pipe grep on hostapd, you should have it already installed here. Right? If you don't see it here, you can simply install it using apt-get. But if you're using the the WLAN image, you should already have it installed. So now what you need to do is we need to change the configuration of that hostapd application. So when we start it, it just uses the the SSID name and all the settings that we want to use for our little case here. So in order to modify the configurations, we have to modify the file that's located under etc, and that's called hostapd.conf. So we can go ahead and open this file, etc hostapd.conf, right? And so it's going to look like this when you open it. Right, so what I'll do is I'll create my own. So I'm going to save that default configuration into like a backup file. Right, and then I need to use a sudo command to do that. And then I'm going to create my own. Making sure I'm using the right syntax. And then I'm going to modify this guy with my all right, and then I'm going to use what I have in the show notes here. Right. So if we go over the configurations a little bit, you'll see that the I'm configuring an SSID that I called Allez les Bleus, and then I have a password to connect to, Champion du Monde, and then I'm using it on 5 gigahertz, and then the channels that I'm using is 36. Obviously, you can configure it the way you want here. Because I want to measure the attenuation on 5 gig, that's why I have it set up that way. And then you specify which interface you will be using to set up your hotspot. So we'll be using WLAN 0, and then you specify the driver of that card. Then you specify your country code. So I'm in Canada, so I'm using CA. Please use the country code related to the country that you're in. And then you decide if you want to have 11N enabled, 11AC, the channel width, the different capabilities of AC, the security. So here I have WPA2 PSK, and then I enabled WMM, right? So here, this is the settings I'm using. If you want to know all the settings you can use on hostapd, I put the link in the show notes so you can actually see all the features available, and it's a pretty big list. I know these ones work for me, so if you want to reuse them for you, no problem. Then I save the file, and then I have my configuration file. Now I can just validate that everything is good. I always like to validate that everything is saved properly, and everything has a proper name. So here you go. I have my configuration for my hotspot, and I know that if everything works well and when I start it, I should be starting to broadcast the SSID Allez les Bleus. Right? So that's the first step, configuring host APD and configuring how we want to configure that SSID. Next, we need to configure our network interfaces, right? We need to make sure that the WLAN 0 interface is actually configured to be, the main connection for the hotspot. So by default, the WLAN card, if you do iwconfig, you'll see that the WLAN card by default is configured in monitor mode on the WLAN Pi, and this is because it's aimed to do some Wi-Fi analysis, Wi-Fi packet captures, or Wi-Fi listening analysis. So monitor mode is perfect for that, but that's not really what we want in this case if we want to do a hotspot. So in order to modify the way the network interfaces are configured on the WLAN Pi, we have to modify the configuration file called etc network interfaces, right? So in order to modify it, you can just use a sudo, and then I use nano again, etc network, and then interfaces, and you'll see that you should already have some content in there. You should see your wired interface, and then you have the wireless card. You see that you have two of them because on some WLAN Pis you actually have two USB ports, so you could have two Wi-Fi cards connected to it. In my case, I have the version of the WLAN Pi that only has one USB interface, so I'm only going to use the first wireless adapter. And as you can see right now, it's configured as getting an IP address somehow, and then no static IP address I configured, and then you have the monitor mode on. Okay, so what we'll need to do here for the hotspot is first we'll have to configure a static IP address that the interface will use, right? And then this will be used later on when we connect the client to the network, so the client can actually access the speed test that's hosted by the WLAN Pi. So we actually need to give the WLAN Pi an IP address in that network. So in my case here, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and comment this line because we won't need this, but I need to configure a static IP address, so I need to tell Linux here that I'll be using a static IP addresses for that interface. All right, so you can use that command to do that. And then I'm going to uncomment this one, and I'm going to configure my IP addresses here. You can use whichever network you want here. I like the 192.168.88.1 IP address, so I'll use this one. I don't necessarily need to set up any gateways here in my case because I'm not going to do any bridging. It's just going to be a local network. DNS, I guess I don't necessarily need it, but I just uncomment it here. And then I'm going to comment this one, right? Because now we're not going to use that in monitor mode. And I'm going to disable wireless power since this will be the main connection for the hotspot. All right, so this is how I'm going to configure that interface, and then I can save everything. Once again, I can validate that my changes have been applied, and then I can see I have the IP addresses and everything. So this is good. We just configured the interfaces exactly how we want it to be, right? The next step will be to set up a DHCP server. So whenever we connect a device to that new network, it can actually receive an IP address in that subnet, and we can actually communicate with the WLAN Pi to do some throughput testing. So I had some struggles there, and that's actually why it took me a long time to publish that blog post, is because I was trying to make that work using an application called, a program called DNS mask, and I couldn't make it work. I couldn't have the DNS mask DHCP server to provide IP addresses to the client. So I tried to look at alternative solutions, and I came across another program called ISC DHCP server. And it's funny because this little program, ISP DHCP server, is already installed on the WLAN Pi, which is great for what we're doing here, right? So if I want to validate that, I can use once again the exact same command we use for to validate that hostapd was installed. So dpkg list minus list, and then you can grab on the ISC DHCP server, and you should see that it is already installed here. Okay, so you don't necessarily need to install the package or anything. We can just leverage that and modify the configurations to pretty much create a new pool of addresses for our interfaces. Okay, before creating that new pool, we need to also tell the WLAN Pi that we'll be expecting the DHCP requests coming from the Wi-Fi NIC, right? So to do that, we need to change the configuration of the file, the configuration file that's located in etc default, and it's called ISC DHCP server. And then in this file, at the end, you'll see interfaces, right? And then it says on what interfaces should the DHCP server serve DHCP request. So right now we only have USB 0, and here you can just add a space and then add the WLAN 0 interface. That's all you have to do. You can just save it, right? Make sure that the changes have been applied. All right, so everything looks good here. So that's the first step. And then the next step is to create our pool. So to configure our pool, we have to edit another configuration file that's located into etc DHCP and then dhcpd.conf, right? And here, if you open this file, you'll see that by default you already have some configurations. You have some examples at the beginning, and if you go all the way to the bottom, you'll see that you already have a WLAN Pi DHCP server config that has been pre-configured to be used on the USB interface, and then all you have to do is add another block of configuration to specify the scope that you'll be using for your Wi-Fi hotspot. So I have that in the show notes. I'm just going to copy paste it here and go through the configuration with you. So here I just added a comment saying that this will be the pool will be using for the hotspot. And then here you define a subnet. So the subnet I'm using is 192.168.88.0 with a subnet mask of /24. And you notice it's the same subnet that I used to configure my WLAN 0 interface in, which makes sense. And then here I specify the range for my DHCP clients between .100 and .200. You can do whatever you want here. And then you specify your lease time, your max lease time, and then that's pretty much all you need to do here. You can save your config, right? Make sure that everything looks good. Right, I have it here. And then voila, you're done. You configured your hostapd, you configured your interfaces, and then you configured your DHCP server. So now you should have everything, ready to start your hotspot. Okay. And then in order to, to validate that, all you have to do now is start the hostapd application and try to see if it's broadcasting an SSID. And once it's broadcasting an SSID, you can see if you can connect a client to it, right? Also, if you look at the ISC DHCP server, you'll see that the service is actually running. So if you do service ISC DHCP server status, right, you'll see it's actually running right now. So what you'll have to do in order for it to take the new configuration into account, you have to stop and restart the service, right? So let me see if I can do it right now. Service ISC DHCP server stop, right? It stopped right now, and then I can just start it again. So here, if you made any configuration issues, it's going to tell you that something is wrong, right? So here I didn't get any issues, so I can actually check the status again, and everything is running fine. So I know it should be fine. And then I can go ahead and start my hostapd application. So I had to reboot the WLAN Pi, but I think it's going to work now. So let me, so I connected back to WLAN Pi using my François username. Let me start the hostapd application again using the proper configuration file that we created earlier. Right, and it's going to start the AP. All right, and then now we can go back to the iPad and try to see if I can actually connect. So let me go back to the iPad. So when we go to the settings, we can first validate that the SSID is broadcasting. So here I see allele bleu, so very good sign. I click on it. I can now enter the password, champion du monde, and make sure I can actually associate to that SSID. So now I can see that I'm associated, but I have no internet connection, and that's because I didn't set up the bridge, a connection between the Wi-Fi and the Ethernet card, so that's totally normal. Now I can validate in the advanced settings that I actually have an IP address, and I can see that I have the 192.168.88.100. So everything went well. I received an IP address from the WLAN Pi, and I was able to associate to the hotspot. So now I can actually go to my navigator and then go to the 192.168.88.1 IP address, WLAN Pi. I can refresh the page. So now I see that I have access to it, and I can start a speed test directly there from the browser. And then here I will be generating my speed test, my traffic through the new hotspot connection. And as you can see here, everything is working well and everything is working fine. Just want to show you the the Wi-Fi traffic on the spectrum. So here I've opened Ekahau. I have the Psychic connected to Ekahau, and I'm looking at the spectrum view on 5 gig. So as you can see, I have my SSID here. And I can see it on channel 36. And then, so what I can do, I can actually zoom on channel 36. So we'll have a better view of what's happening. And so now if I go back to my iPad and I start a speed test again, we should see some, Wi-Fi traffic happening on that channel. So here you can actually see, what OFDM looks like. You can actually see, the different subcarriers. You can see that the central subcarriers, I'm going to start another one. Central subcarrier is not used, and then you can actually see the different subcarriers here. So it's actually a really good example to show the students. You can actually see, here on the channel view, the utilization of the channel, and that's just a good way to show the students, what a typical Wi-Fi signal looks like. And then you can play with the channel width on your hostapd configuration to show the difference between 20 and 40 megahertz wide channels. So I'm pretty happy here. Everything is working well. I want to show you a couple of the validations we can do. So if I go back to my laptop here, okay, I'm going to SSH again. I'm going to create a new session here, 192 to the WLAN Pi. And then I'll show you a couple of commands you can use to validate that your hotspot is working well. So the first one is IW WLAN 0 info. And here you should be able to see the SSID, right? You should see that you're in type AP. You can see the channel that you're using, the channel width, and you can see the transmit power used by your little Wi-Fi card. You can also use iwconfig. It will give you some sort of information, transmit power. It will tell you that you're in the master mode, right? But it won't tell you the SSID. But at least you see you're not in the Magento mode anymore. And then the last one you can use, I guess, is ifconfig. Ifconfig will just show you that you have the proper IP addresses, right? Proper subnet. So a combination of these three commands will help you to validate it if everything has been configured properly on your host APD. If you see something that's not exactly the same, here you could maybe figure out something is wrong in your configuration and try to fix it. All right. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you want more details about this tutorial, head over to the blog semfionetworks.com/blog. You should be able to find the article where it details all the configuration files and all these different steps. If you think this was useful for you, please share the video with others. And I'm looking forward to your feedbacks in how we could make this whole solution better. Thank you very much for listening, and I guess I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.